5 years ago, Marcus called my art history degree worthless paper. Now he's quitting because I, Maya Chen, am his new CEO. The irony isn't lost on me. It's a bitter, satisfying tang on my tongue. He's still standing there, jaw clenched, his knuckles white where he grips the back of one of the visitor chairs. He looks like he wants to shatter it. Or maybe me. It's hard to tell. His usually immaculate suit seems ruffled, his tie slightly askew. For a man who prided himself on control, he's dangerously close to losing it. So that's it? His voice is a low growl, a tremor of disbelief running through it. You're really going to sit there and accept this? I pick up the letter, the expensive stationery cool beneath my fingertips. Meridian Arts and Culture. He always talked about this place, this company, like it was the Holy Grail. He'd mapped out his ascent to this very office, detailed it to me over countless dinners, his eyes gleaming with ambition. He never imagined me in this seat. Never. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, slices through the present. His voice, laced with that familiar, condescending tone, echoes in my mind. Art history? Maya, that's not a real degree. It's a hobby. You'll never amount to anything with worthless paper like that. What are you going to do? Curate a collection of dust bunnies? His laughter had been dismissive, a casual cruelty that had chipped away at my heart. I smoothed down the letter, my movements deliberately calm. This is my office, my company to lead. I won't let his bitterness, his shock, tarnish this moment. This is a power move, I suppose, but it doesn't feel like one. It feels like liberation, like shedding a skin that's been too tight for too long. Yes, Marcus, I say, my voice even, professional. I meet his gaze, unflinching. I accept your resignation. Effective immediately if that's your wish. He visibly trembles. Rage, pure and unadulterated, flashes in his eyes. He probably expected me to beg him to stay or to gloat or to break down. I do none of those things. I simply hold his gaze, a quiet strength settling in my chest. The pain he inflicted, the years of doubt he fostered, they're still there, but they no longer define me. They're just scars, reminders of battles won. The silence stretches, thick and suffocating. The familiar scent of his cologne, once a comfort, now feels invasive in this space, my space. It mingles with the rich leather of my chair, a strange olfactory battle. He's the past, I'm the future. He finally breaks eye contact, his shoulders slumping almost imperceptibly. Defeat. It's not a good look on him. I can't work for you, Maya. You understand that, right? I understand that you're choosing not to. I correct him gently. And I respect your decision. He scoffs, a harsh, grating sound. Respect? You call this respect? Engineering this humiliation? I lean back in my chair, the leather creaking softly. There was no engineering, Marcus. I earned this position, just like I earned my degree. He opens his mouth, then closes it, a muscle twitching in his cheek. He knows I'm right. He knows deep down that he underestimated me, dismissed me, and now that dismissal has come back to bite him in the most spectacular way. He runs a hand through his perfectly styled hair, dislodging a few strands. He looks lost. And for a fleeting moment, I almost feel a pang of something akin to pity. But it vanishes as quickly as it comes. Pity is a luxury I can't afford, not with him. I'll clear out my desk, he mutters, his voice hoarse. Take your time, I say. HR will be in touch regarding your final arrangements. He nods curtly, still refusing to meet my eyes. He turns to leave, his movements stiff, robotic. He's halfway to the door when I speak again, my voice soft but firm. Marcus? He pauses, his back still to me. There's something you should know before you go, I say, the words hanging in the air. About why I really got this position. He doesn't turn, but I see his shoulders tense. He's listening. He has to. His entire world has just been upended. He needs to understand how. And I need him to understand. Not for revenge, but for closure. For the Maya who cried herself to sleep after his cruel words. For the Maya who almost believed him. This is for her. The silence in the room is a living thing, pulsing with unspoken words, with years of history. He waits. I take a breath, the scent of his cologne fainter now, almost overpowered by the lingering aroma of success, of a future he never envisioned for me. And I begin to tell him. 5 years ago. It feels like a lifetime, another Maya, another world. We were happy, or so I thought. Marcus and I were the golden couple. Everyone said so. He, the ambitious finance prodigy with a clear path to the top. Me, the quiet, studious art history student, fascinated by stories etched in stone and canvas. We were planning our future, a beautiful tapestry woven with his ambition and my, well, he always called my passion a cute hobby. I remember the excitement bubbling in me as I worked on my thesis. It was on cultural preservation in rapidly urbanizing landscapes, focusing on how ancient temples in Southeast Asia were being impacted by modern development. It was more than just a degree to me, it was a calling. I'd spend hours in the university library, surrounded by dusty tomes and digital archives, piecing together narratives of resilience and loss. I'd talk to Marcus about it, my voice alive with enthusiasm, trying to share the thrill of discovery, the urgency of protecting these irreplaceable pieces of human history. "That's nice, babe," he'd say, his eyes still glued to his laptop screen, scrolling through stock market updates or merger and acquisition reports. "But how's that going to pay the bills, huh?" His dismissal was subtle at first, a gentle teasing. "My little art historian," he'd call me, a patronizing pat on my head. But as graduation loomed, his remarks grew sharper, more insistent. He started talking about our future, a future where I'd have a real job. Something in marketing, perhaps, or PR for one of the banks he dealt with. Something that fit his image of a power couple. The night he proposed, it wasn't the romantic, heartfelt moment I'd always dreamed of. We were at his parents' lavish penthouse, the city lights glittering below like a carpet of diamonds. He got down on one knee, presented a ridiculously large diamond ring, its facets catching the light, almost blinding me. But the sparkle felt cold. "Maya Chen," he'd said, his voice formal, practiced. "I want to spend my life with you, but we need to be practical. This art history thing, it's time to let it go. Get a sensible MBA, maybe. I'll pay for it. We'll build an empire together, but you need to be serious." His conditions, that's what they were. Not a proposal, but a transaction. My heart, which had leaped with a conditioned joy at the sight of the ring, now plummeted. The rough texture of the platinum band, as I slid it onto my finger for a brief, suffocating moment, felt like a shackle. "You don't respect it, do you?" I'd whispered, the words catching in my throat. "My passion, my work." He'd sighed, that exasperated sound I was beginning to dread. "Maya, be realistic. It's art history. It's nice. But it's not going to get us where we need to be. I need a partner who's on the same page, someone who understands the real world." That was the moment. The moment the carefully constructed foundation of our relationship cracked, revealing the ugly truth beneath. He didn't see me. He saw a reflection of his own ambitions, an accessory to his predetermined life. My intelligence, my passion, my dreams, they were inconvenient, frivolous, worthless. My parents, immigrants who had sacrificed everything to give me a good education, had always instilled in me the value of pursuing what I loved, of making a difference, however small. They ran a small, beloved neighborhood bakery, their hands calloused from years of kneading dough, their faces etched with the quiet dignity of hard work. They didn't have Marcus's family's inherited wealth, their sprawling connections, their effortless entry into the echelons of power. But they had integrity. They believed in me. He saw their simple life as a charming, slightly embarrassing backdrop to my story, one he intended to rewrite with a more glamorous narrative. He never understood that their sacrifices were the bedrock of my ambition, that their quiet strength was the steel in my spine. I remember pulling the ring off my finger. It felt surprisingly heavy. I placed it on the cool marble of the coffee table between us. His eyes widened, a flicker of surprise, then annoyance. "Don't be dramatic, Maya," he'd said, his voice tight. "I'm not," I'd replied, my own voice surprisingly steady, though my heart was shattering into a million pieces. I'm choosing my worthless paper, Marcus. I'm choosing me. My resolve in that moment crystallized. The pain was immense, a raw, gaping wound, but through it, a fierce clarity emerged. I wouldn't be diminished, I wouldn't be molded. He gave me 24 hours. 24 hours to come to my senses, to choose his version of our future. He was so sure I'd capitulate, so sure that the glitter of his world, the promise of security and status, would be enough to make me abandon my own path. I walked out of that penthouse, the city lights blurring through my tears. The engagement ring, with its cold, hard brilliance, remained on the table. I didn't look back. I spent the next 24 hours not agonizing over the decision that had already been made in the instant I saw the dismissive pity in his eyes, but grieving the future I thought we'd had, grieving the man I thought he was. And then I started to build. Not an empire, something far more valuable. Myself. The decision I made that night, walking away from him in the gilded cage he offered, didn't just change my path. It set me free. It was the first quiet power move in a long series of them, a quiet defiance that would, unbeknownst to either of us, lead me straight to this very office 5 years later, the office he always wanted. Graduation day was bittersweet. My parents were there, their faces beaming with pride, their eyes a little misty. They'd framed my diploma, the worthless paper, and it hung in their small living room above the worn, comfortable sofa, a testament to their sacrifices and my quiet perseverance. Marcus wasn't there, of course. Our spectacular implosion was still fresh, a raw wound. His absence was a void, but also, strangely, a liberation. I was on my own, truly on my own, for the first time. The first year was brutal. Marcus's mocking words seemed to echo in every rejection email. "We regret to inform you, while your qualifications are impressive, we've decided to move forward with other candidates." The art world, it turned out, was notoriously difficult to break into, especially for someone without connections, armed only with a degree many, like Marcus, deemed impractical. I sent out hundreds of applications to museums, galleries, cultural institutions, auction houses. The responses, when they came, were invariably polite but firm no's. My parents worried, I knew. They never said anything, never added to my burden, but I saw the anxiety in my mother's eyes when I came home late from another dead-end temp job. Data entry, coffee making, retail. Anything to pay the rent on my tiny studio apartment and keep the ramen noodles coming. I was determined not to ask them for money. They'd done enough. Then, a lifeline. A small, almost hidden notice on a university bulletin board for a volunteer archiving position at a local historical society. It was unpaid, dusty, and involved deciphering nearly illegible 19th century correspondence. I applied immediately. That's where I met Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell. She was a retired curator from the City Museum, a formidable woman with piercing blue eyes, a shock of silver hair, and a reputation for being brilliant but terrifyingly direct. She volunteered at the society twice a week, mostly, I think, to keep her mind sharp and to escape her overly solicitous children. She found me one afternoon sneezing amongst a pile of crumbling ledgers, a smudge of ink on my nose. The air in the archives was always thick with the musty smell of old manuscripts, a scent I was beginning to associate with a strange kind of comfort. "You're the art history girl, aren't you?" she'd said, her voice surprisingly kind. I'd nodded, bracing for the usual skepticism. Instead, she'd smiled. "Good. We need more people who can actually read these things, not just stare at them blankly. What's your specialty?" I told her about my thesis on cultural preservation. Her eyes lit up. It turned out she'd done her doctoral work on a similar subject, decades ago. We talked for hours that day about the challenges of preserving heritage in a world obsessed with the new, about the stories hidden in forgotten objects. She didn't just see my potential. She seemed to fan a flickering ember of ambition within me, a flame I thought had been extinguished by countless rejections. Dr. Hartwell became my mentor, my champion. She had connections, of course, not the flashy, power-brokering kind Marcus's family wielded, but deep respected roots within the cultural fabric of the city. A few months later, she recommended me for an internship at a small avant-garde gallery downtown. It was still mostly fetching coffee and managing the mailing list, but It was a foot in the door, a real door, into the world I so desperately wanted to be a part of. I devoured every opportunity. I stayed late, helping the gallery owner, a perpetually stressed but passionate woman named Sarah, hang exhibitions. I learned about curation, about marketing, about the delicate dance of art and commerce. I learned the business side, the pragmatic realities that underpinned the beautiful, often ethereal world of art. My worthless degree had given me a deep understanding of context, of history, of the power of narrative skills that I was beginning to realize were surprisingly transferable. I started to see patterns, to understand how art institutions operated, where their weaknesses lay. Many were struggling to connect with younger audiences, to adapt to the digital age. My mind, always drawn to problem solving, began to churn with ideas. It was during a particularly tedious task, digitizing the gallery's haphazard collection of artist slides, that an idea sparked: a digital heritage project. What if we could use technology not just to archive, but to bring these cultural stories to life in new, engaging ways? Virtual tours of endangered sites, interactive timelines, augmented reality experiences overlaid on historical artifacts? I drafted a proposal, my fingers flying across the keyboard late into the night, fueled by cheap coffee and a burgeoning excitement. I presented it to Sarah, who, to my surprise, was intrigued. We started small, a pilot project focused on a local historical landmark. It was a steep learning curve. I taught myself basic coding, video editing, digital marketing. I persevered despite a shoestring budget and skeptical glances from some of the more traditional artists. The project gained traction. Local media picked up on it, and suddenly, our little gallery was getting attention for something other than its quirky performance art pieces. My ambition, once a fragile seedling, began to ignite, to burn brightly. A few months later, an email landed in my inbox. It was from a private investment firm, one I'd never heard of, specializing in cultural innovation. They'd seen the press on my digital heritage project. They were interested. They wanted to meet a mysterious investor. That was the phrase that kept replaying in my mind. Dr. Hartwell had smiled enigmatically when I'd told her, "The right people will always find you, Maya, if your work speaks loudly enough." I had no idea then, of course. No idea who was really behind that email. No idea that this small, tentative step was the true beginning of my ascent, the first stone laid in the foundation of a future that would far exceed even my wildest dreams. A future where worthless would be the last word anyone would use to describe me or my work. The mysterious investor turned out to be a boutique venture capital firm with a surprisingly keen interest in the intersection of culture and technology. They didn't offer me millions, but they offered something arguably more valuable: seed funding for a more ambitious version of my digital heritage project and, crucially, a job. I joined a mid-tier cultural consulting firm they had a stake in, tasked with building out their new digital preservation and cultural tourism division. Essentially, they were taking a gamble on me and my vision. My life became a whirlwind. I was working 80-hour weeks, fueled by lukewarm takeout and an unshakable belief in what I was doing. The field was still relatively new and often male-dominated. I'd walk into boardrooms, the only woman, often the youngest person there by a decade, and pitch my ideas for revitalizing struggling museums with interactive exhibits, or saving crumbling historical sites by creating immersive digital replicas that could drive tourism and funding. There were a lot of skeptical, patronizing smiles at first. "That's a very charming idea, dear." But I had data, I had projections. My art history background, far from being a liability, gave me a unique understanding of the narratives we were trying to preserve. I could speak the language of curators and historians and then translate that into compelling business proposals for investors and city councils. Slowly, I started winning them over. Occasionally, my path would cross with Marcus's. He was thriving in his finance job, climbing the corporate ladder with predictable speed. We'd bump into each other at alumni events or charity galas his family sponsored. He always had a beautiful, impeccably dressed woman on his arm, someone who looked like she'd stepped out of the pages of a glossy magazine, someone who undoubtedly had an acceptable degree. His comments were always laced with a subtle condescension. "Maya, good to see you. Still playing with those little art projects?" He'd say it with a charming smile, but his eyes held that familiar glint of superiority. I learned to meet his gaze coolly, to offer a polite, non-committal response, and then move on. The sting was still there, a dull ache, but it no longer had the power to derail me. I was too busy building. My breakthrough project came about 2 years in. A historic port district in a declining coastal city was slated for demolition to make way for luxury condos. The local community was devastated but lacked the resources to fight the powerful developers. Our firm was brought in, almost as a last resort, to see if there was any viable way to save it. I threw myself into it. I spent weeks in that city, walking the cobblestone streets, talking to fishermen whose families had worked the docks for generations, poring over forgotten archives. I didn't just see crumbling buildings. I saw layers of history, stories of resilience, a unique cultural identity that was about to be erased. My team and I developed a comprehensive plan, a carefully curated cultural tourism initiative. We proposed restoring key buildings, creating a living history museum, developing guided tours led by local storytellers, and crucially, launching a global digital platform showcasing the district's unique heritage. We secured grants, attracted private investment, and worked with local artisans to create sustainable businesses. It was a monumental undertaking. The project was a resounding success. The district was saved, revitalized. It became a model for sustainable cultural preservation. I started meeting with international clients, speaking at conferences. My reputation was growing. I was no longer just Maya, the art history girl. I was Maya Chen, the innovator who understood how to bridge the past and the future. I remember the crisp sound of my heels on the marble floors at gallery openings, no longer an intern fetching coffee, but an invited guest, a consultant, a speaker. I started to dress the part, investing in sharp suits, elegant dresses. Not to fit into Marcus's world, but to step into my own. My confidence, once a fragile thing, began to radiate from me. My vision expanded beyond small projects. I started to dream bigger. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, an email landed in my inbox. Subject: Invitation to discuss Director of Innovation role, Meridian Arts and Culture. Meridian, Marcus's holy grail. The leading cultural institution in the country, a sprawling behemoth with a storied history, and, as I knew from industry whispers, a desperate need to modernize. My heart hammered against my ribs. Director of Innovation. It was a newly created position. They were looking for someone to shake things up, to drag them into the 21st century. Someone like me. The interview process was rigorous. Multiple rounds, presentations, meetings with stern-faced board members who had been with Meridian since its inception. I didn't hold back. I presented my vision for Meridian, a future where art and technology were seamlessly integrated, where cultural experiences were accessible to everyone, not just the elite. I remember the final interview. It was with the full board. I laid out my 5-year plan, my voice clear and steady, my passion evident. When it came to salary negotiations, I didn't flinch. I knew my worth. I negotiated my salary and the scope of the position from a place of strength, backed by a portfolio of successful projects and a growing industry reputation. They offered me the job, Director of Innovation at Meridian Arts and Culture, with a salary that made my eyes water and a mandate to transform the institution. I had 1 week to decide. 1 week to upend my life, to step onto a much larger stage. I was ecstatic, terrified, exhilarated. I called Dr. Hartwell, my voice trembling. She listened patiently, then chuckled. "My dear Maya," she said, "it seems your little art projects are finally paying off, wouldn't you say?" That night, unable to sleep, I did a deep dive into Meridian's corporate structure, its board members, its primary shareholders, standard due diligence. And that's when I saw it. A name I recognized, buried deep in the list of private equity firms that held a controlling interest in Meridian. Sterling Group Holdings, Victoria Sterling. A legend, a recluse, the enigmatic founder and majority shareholder of Meridian, a woman who hadn't been seen publicly in years, but whose influence was still palpable. And, according to a footnote in a decades-old financial report I unearthed from a digital archive, the primary benefactor of a certain scholarship for promising humanities students at my alma mater. A scholarship I vaguely remembered Dr. Hartwell encouraging me to apply for years ago, one I hadn't gotten. A chill snaked down my spine. Who really owned Meridian Arts and Culture? And more importantly, who had been watching my career with such quiet, calculating interest? The offer wasn't just a job, it felt like a summons. My first day at Meridian Arts and Culture felt like stepping into a different era. The building itself was a monument, all marble and soaring columns, hushed corridors lined with portraits of past luminaries. It was awe-inspiring and slightly intimidating. This was the company Marcus had revered, the place he'd always seen himself conquering. And here I was, walking through its hallowed halls, not as a visitor, but as a newly minted director. The CEO was Victoria Sterling, or rather, the idea of Victoria Sterling. She was a legend in the industry, a name whispered with a mixture of reverence and fear. She had built Meridian from a small, struggling arts foundation into a global cultural powerhouse. But she was also an enigma, intensely private, almost a recluse in recent years. I was scheduled to meet her on my first day, a prospect that filled me with a nervous anticipation. Her office was surprisingly modern, a sleek, minimalist space hidden within the old-world grandeur of the building. And Victoria Sterling herself was nothing like the stern, formidable image I'd conjured. She was small, bird-like, with intelligent, assessing eyes that missed nothing. She greeted me with a warm, almost mischievous smile. "Maya Chen," she said, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable authority. "Welcome to Meridian. We've been expecting you." There was a strange emphasis on the we. Over the next few weeks, I learned the reality of Meridian. Beneath the polished veneer, the institution was struggling. It was weighed down by outdated practices, resistant to change, and rapidly losing relevance in a world that was moving faster than its marble foundations could keep up with. Visitor numbers were declining, endowments were shrinking, and the digital presence was a joke. My mandate was clear: shake things up, innovate, or watch Meridian slowly fade into obsolescence. I developed an ambitious plan, a roadmap to revolutionize Meridian. It involved leveraging technology to create immersive experiences, digitizing archives to make them globally accessible, forging partnerships with tech companies, and completely overhauling their approach to community engagement. I wanted to make Meridian not just a repository of art, but a dynamic, interactive cultural hub. The resistance was immediate and fierce. Old guard employees, many of whom had been with Meridian for decades, saw me as an outsider, a young upstart with radical ideas that threatened their comfortable status quo. I was met with polite smiles that didn't reach the eyes, with passive aggression in meetings, with a general reluctance to embrace anything new. "That's not how we do things at Meridian," became a familiar refrain. A few months into my tenure, the HR department forwarded me a list of candidates for a mid-level management position in the strategic partnerships team. And there, staring back at me from a glossy CV, was a name that made my breath catch: Marcus Thorne. He was applying for a position at Meridian, unaware, of course, that I was now a director here, a key figure in the department he was hoping to join. The irony was almost too perfect. The day of his interview, I made sure I was, coincidentally, in the reception area when he arrived. He strode in, exuding that familiar confidence, his expensive suit impeccable, his handshake firm as he greeted the HR manager. Then he saw me. His confident smile faltered, then froze. His eyes widened, first in disbelief, then in a dawning, horrified recognition. The color drained from his face. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. My ghost, perhaps, returned to haunt his ambitions. "Maya," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. What are you doing here?" "Hello, Marcus," I said, my voice calm, professional. I even managed a small, polite smile. "I work here, Director of Innovation." The HR manager looked back and forth between us, a confused frown on her face. The tension in the room was a palpable thing, a thick, crackling silence. Marcus looked like he wanted the marble floor to swallow him whole. He recoiled, physically recoiled, as if my very presence was an affront. Later that week, I had to present my strategic vision to the entire executive board, including several of the old guard who were still deeply skeptical of my plans. The conference room was vast, intimidating, the long mahogany table polished to a mirror sheen. I could feel their eyes on me, judging, waiting for me to fail. I took a deep breath and began. I didn't just present data and projections, I told a story. A story of Meridian's potential, of its legacy reimagined for a new generation. I painted a picture of a vibrant, dynamic institution, a leader in cultural innovation. My passion for the subject, for the art, for the possibilities shone through. I commanded the room, not with aggression, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew her subject, who believed in her vision. When I finished, there was a moment of silence. Then, one by one, even the most hardened skeptics began to nod. I'd won them over, not all of them, not completely, but it was a start. A few months later, on the strength of that presentation and the early successes of my pilot programs, I was promoted. Vice President of Strategic Development. I was now second in command for all future planning at Meridian. As for Marcus's application, I handled it with complete professionalism. His qualifications were adequate. But his interview, understandably, had been a disaster. He'd been flustered, defensive, unable to articulate a clear vision. The feedback from the hiring committee was lukewarm at best. He was, to put it mildly, not the best candidate. I signed off on his rejection letter without a trace of malice, only a strange sense of detachment. He was a footnote in my story now, not the main character. Then, the announcement that shook Meridian to its core. Victoria Sterling was retiring. After 40 years at the helm, the enigmatic CEO was stepping down. The news rippled through the institution, creating a wave of uncertainty and speculation. The search for a new CEO would begin immediately. And suddenly, the stakes were higher than I could have ever imagined. The lion's den was about to get a whole lot more dangerous. The CEO selection process at Meridian was an intricate dance, a blend of corporate ritual and high-stakes maneuvering. A search committee was formed, comprised of key board members and external consultants. They were considering both internal and external candidates, and the corridors of Meridian buzzed with hushed speculation. My name was on the internal shortlist. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. I knew I had a strong contender in my comprehensive vision for Meridian's future. It wasn't just a theoretical plan anymore. My pilot programs, the interactive museum wing, the digital archive project, the community arts initiative were showing measurable results. Visitor engagement was up, particularly among younger demographics. We were attracting new corporate sponsorships. The media, once critical of Meridian's stagnation, was starting to take notice, running features on our innovative approaches. We were becoming a case study for how a legacy institution could reinvent itself. Marcus, I heard through the industry grapevine, was now at a competing, though smaller, cultural foundation. He was, by all accounts, doing well, but his firm lacked Meridian's prestige, its global reach. I imagined him watching my rise, Meridian's resurgence under my influence, with a growing sense of resentment. His dismissal of my little art projects must have tasted like ash in his mouth now. The interview rounds for the CEO position were grueling. Multiple sessions with the search committee, then presentations to the full board. They grilled me on financial projections, on crisis management, on my long-term strategic thinking. I didn't just talk about art and culture. I talked about market share, about revenue streams, about sustainable growth. I demonstrated that my worthless art history degree had equipped me with critical thinking skills, an understanding of complex systems, and the ability to craft compelling narratives, all essential for a CEO. There was a moment during one particularly intense quanda with a notoriously conservative board member, Mr. Abernathy, when I realized something profound. He was challenging my lack of a traditional finance background, questioning my ability to lead such a large organization. "Miss Chen," he'd said, his tone skeptical, "this isn't a university seminar. This is a multi-million-dollar enterprise." Instead of getting defensive, I leaned forward, the weight of my presentation materials suddenly feeling insignificant in my hands. "Mr. Abernathy," I replied, my voice calm but firm, "understanding the value of a 17th century masterpiece and understanding the value of a 21st century corporation are not so different. Both require a deep appreciation of context an eye for detail, the ability to discern true worth from fleeting trends, and the vision to ensure their legacy endures. Meridian's most valuable asset is its cultural capital. I know how to leverage that capital in ways this institution has never imagined. My passion, my conviction, it filled the boardroom. I saw a flicker of surprise, then respect in Mr. Abernathy's eyes. I wasn't just surviving these challenges, I was thriving. I dominated the boardroom, not through aggression, but through the undeniable power of a well-articulated, deeply believed-in vision. The skeptics were still there, but their voices were growing fainter. Throughout this process, Victoria Sterling remained an enigma. She had officially recused herself from the selection process, yet her presence loomed large. She'd occasionally summon me to her private office, ostensibly to discuss ongoing projects. But our conversations would invariably drift towards leadership, towards legacy. She never explicitly offered advice, but she listened intently, her shrewd eyes missing nothing. Her quiet encouragement was a lifeline, a silent endorsement that spoke volumes. She was mentoring me in her own subtle, inscrutable way. Then, a week before the final board vote, Dr. Hartwell invited me for tea. We sat in her sun-drenched living room, surrounded by books and artifacts from her long career. The scent of Earl Grey and old paper filled the air. "Victoria's very impressed with you, Maya," she said, her blue eyes twinkling. "I hope so," I replied, stirring sugar into my tea. "She's hard to read." Dr. Hartwell chuckled. "That's Victoria, always has been. Did I ever tell you we were roommates in college?" I nearly dropped my teacup. "No, you never mentioned—" She smiled. "Victoria was a fiercely ambitious history major back then. I was the quiet art historian. Sound familiar?" And then the pieces began to click into place. The mysterious investor in my first digital heritage project, the scholarship Victoria Sterling had endowed, the subtle, almost invisible hand that seemed to have guided certain opportunities my way. "Sterling Group Holdings," I whispered. The name of the firm that held a controlling interest in Meridian, the firm that had noticed my small gallery project years ago. Victoria's firm. They were the ones who— "Victoria has always believed in nurturing talent, Maya," Dr. Hartwell said softly, "especially talent that others might overlook. She saw something in your work, right from the beginning. She didn't interfere directly, but she made sure the right doors were open, that your voice had a chance to be heard." It wasn't nepotism. It was sponsorship. A quiet network of powerful women who believed in lifting others as they climbed. Victoria hadn't handed me anything. I'd earned every step. But she, and Dr. Hartwell, had ensured I had a fair chance to prove myself in a world where people like Marcus often held all the initial advantages. Armed with this knowledge, with the quiet backing of Meridian's founder, I went into my final presentations with renewed confidence. I secured crucial support from key stakeholders, swaying even some of the most entrenched traditionalists. My vision for Meridian was no longer just a possibility. It felt inevitable. The board vote was scheduled in 2 days. The summit was in sight. I allowed myself a moment of quiet exultation. Then my phone rang. It was my assistant, her voice tight with panic. "Maya, you need to come to the office. Now, there's a situation." An anonymous email had been sent to the entire board and leaked to a prominent arts journalist. It was a vicious, character-assassinating attack, filled with half-truths and outright lies about my past projects, questioning my credentials, insinuating financial impropriety, even hinting at an inappropriate relationship with a former mentor. It was designed to destroy my reputation, to derail my candidacy. Just days before the final vote, my blood ran cold. I knew, with a sickening certainty, who was behind this. There was only one person who stood to gain, one person bitter enough, desperate enough to stoop so low. Marcus, the summit so close, was suddenly shrouded in a poisonous fog. My carefully constructed world threatened to come crashing down. The anonymous email was a masterclass in malicious insinuation. It didn't outright accuse, but it planted seeds of doubt, twisting my accomplishments into something sinister. My rapid rise, suspicious. My innovative projects, potentially unethical. My mentorship from Dr. Hartwell, recast as something inappropriate. It was designed to hit all the hot buttons of a conservative board: stability, reputation, propriety. I spent a frantic 48 hours working with Meridian's legal team and a PR crisis firm Victoria Sterling had quietly put me in touch with. We traced the email's origin, a series of encrypted servers, but with digital breadcrumbs that pointed, if not definitively then strongly, towards a network Marcus was known to leverage for opposition research in his finance deals. He'd learned his tactics in the cutthroat world of corporate raiding, and now he was applying them to me. The board meeting was tense. The air in the room was thick with unspoken accusations. I addressed the email head on. I didn't get defensive. I presented facts, documentation, letters of support from every institution I'd ever worked with, including glowing testimonials from the very city councils and community leaders the email tried to paint as my victims. Dr. Hartwell, in a rare public statement, issued a scathing condemnation of the anonymous attack, her words carrying the weight of her unimpeachable reputation. And then, Victoria Sterling, who was not officially supposed to be there, swept into the boardroom. She didn't speak to the specific allegations. She simply looked at each board member, one by one, her gaze unwavering. Meridian needs a leader with vision, with courage, and with integrity, she said, her quiet voice filling the room. Maya Chen is that leader. This pathetic attempt to derail her only proves her strength. Don't let cowards dictate our future. The vote was unanimous. I was the new CEO of Meridian Arts and Culture. My first week in the corner office, Victoria's old office, now mine, was a blur of meetings, strategic planning sessions, and the quiet, satisfying work of setting my vision in motion. The weight of responsibility was immense, but so was the exhilaration. I was finally in a position to make real, lasting change. Marcus, predictably, didn't take the news well. I heard whispers of his increasingly desperate attempts to undermine me through industry connections, spreading rumors, and trying to poach key staff. It was all background noise. I was too focused on the future to be dragged back into his petty squabbles. Then, about a month into my tenure, my assistant buzzed me. "Miss Chen, there's a Marcus Thorne here for his 2:30 interview. For the Deputy Director of Special Projects role?" I paused, the pen in my hand hovering over a budget approval. Deputy Director of Special Projects. A decent role, but several rungs below the director position he'd applied for years ago. He was applying to work under my leadership, and clearly he had no idea. The universe, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humor. "Send him in," I said, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on my lips. He walked in, looking a little worn around the edges this time. His suit was still expensive, but it didn't sit quite as perfectly. There were faint shadows under his eyes. He stopped dead when he saw me behind the CEO's desk. If he'd looked shocked when he saw me at Meridian before, this was something else entirely. Horror, pure, unadulterated horror. His face went ashen. "Maya," he breathed, the name a ragged exhalation. "No, it can't be." "Hello, Marcus," I said, my voice even, devoid of triumph. Just a quiet acknowledgement of the absurdity of it all. "Please, have a seat." He didn't move, he just stared, his mind visibly struggling to process the reality of me, in this chair, in this office, the CEO, his potential boss. You're the CEO?" I nodded, "as of last month." And then, the confrontation I'd half expected, half dreaded for 5 years. It wasn't explosive, it was implosive. He didn't shout, he just stood there, deflating like a punctured balloon. The fight, the arrogance, the condescension, it all just drained out of him, leaving behind a hollow shell. He finally sank into one of the visitor chairs, the one he'd gripped with such fury during our last encounter in this very office, when he'd quit after finding out I was a director. Now I was the CEO. He fumbled in his briefcase and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A resignation letter. Again. He placed it on my desk, the gesture almost identical to the last time, yet utterly different in its energy. Then, it had been an act of defiance. Now it was an act of surrender. "I can't," he said, his voice barely audible. I can't." I picked up the letter. "Before you go, Marcus," I said, echoing my words from our last meeting, "there's something you should know about why I really got this position." He looked up, his eyes filled with a weary resignation. It wasn't just my work, my vision, I continued. It was a network of people who believed in me, people you never saw, never valued. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, for instance. She wasn't just a retired curator. She was Victoria Sterling's college roommate, her oldest friend. She saw my potential when I was an unpaid volunteer in a dusty archive. She and Victoria quietly opened doors for me, not to give me unearned advantages, but to ensure that someone with passion and a different perspective had a chance to be heard, a chance to compete on a playing field that isn't always level. His face crumpled, the slow dawning realization of how his own prejudices, his own narrow definition of success, had blinded him. His dismissal of my degree, of my entire field of study, hadn't just been insulting, it had been a colossal misjudgment. He'd failed to see the intricate web of connections, the quiet power that existed outside his own gilded circles. He'd underestimated the worthless paper and the woman who held it. And in doing so, he'd limited himself, cost himself the very career he'd always craved. The satisfying click of my pen as I signed an acquisition agreement for a cutting-edge VR company an hour later was a small personal punctuation mark to that realization. His failure was not my victory, but my success was certainly a testament to his short-sightedness. The irony, Marcus, I said, not unkindly, is that your prejudice, your belief that my art history degree was worthless, is what ultimately cost you. You were so busy looking down on me, you never saw me rising above you. I paused, then slid his resignation letter back across the desk. Or, I said, my voice softening slightly, you could tear that up. The deputy director role is still open. It's a chance to learn, to grow, to see the value in things you once dismissed. The choice, as always, is yours. He stared at the letter, then at me, his expression unreadable. Later that week, I gave my first all-hands speech as CEO of Meridian Arts and Culture. I spoke of my vision, of our future, of the power of art and culture to connect, to heal, to inspire. I spoke of the importance of valuing all kinds of intelligence, all kinds of passion. I didn't mention Marcus. He was a ghost of the past, and I was firmly focused on the future. The question of his decision, whether he would swallow his pride and accept my offer or disappear from my life for good, hung in the air. Another cliffhanger in a life that had been full of them. 6 months later, Meridian Arts and Culture was a different institution. The transformation wasn't just visible in the sleek, new digital interfaces or the buzz of young creatives in the once stuffy halls. It was in the energy, the renewed sense of purpose that permeated every department. We launched a global digital arts festival that broke all previous engagement records. Our educational outreach programs, leveraging VR and AR technology, were being hailed as revolutionary. We'd just received the Cultural Innovation Award from the International Arts Council. The scent of fresh flowers, always lilies, my favorite, permanently perfumed my office, a fragrant reminder of new beginnings, completely erasing the lingering ghost of Marcus's old cologne. My parents visited my corner office last month. My father, usually a man of few words, had tears in his eyes as he looked out at the cityscape from my window. My mother clutched my hand, her calloused palm a familiar comfort, and simply said, "We always knew, Maya. We always knew you were meant for great things." Their pride was my most cherished reward. One of my first initiatives as CEO was establishing the Phoenix Scholarship Fund. It was dedicated to supporting underrepresented students pursuing degrees in the humanities and arts. Students who, like me, might face skepticism and financial hurdles. I wanted to ensure that other worthless papers had the chance to prove their incalculable value. Dr. Hartwell and Victoria Sterling were the first major donors, and Marcus, he surprised me. After a week of silence, he'd walked back into my office, not with a resignation letter, but with a hesitant humility I'd never seen in him before. He accepted the deputy director position. The first few months were awkward for both of us. There were moments when his old arrogance would flicker, quickly extinguished by the new reality of our dynamic. But slowly, grudgingly at first, then with a surprising diligence, he began to learn. He started to see the value in the little art projects, the strategic thinking behind the cultural initiatives. He was smart, ambitious. Those qualities hadn't changed. What changed was his perspective. He was still on a steep learning curve, but for the first time, I saw potential for genuine growth in him. Perhaps his own worthless dismissal of me had inadvertently set him on a path to becoming a better, more rounded professional, and maybe even a better man. Time would tell. I often reflected on the journey, from that heartbroken girl walking away from a shattered engagement to the woman now leading one of the world's foremost cultural institutions. It hadn't been easy. There were countless moments of doubt, of struggle, of wanting to give up. But the passion for my field, the belief in the power of art and story, had been my North Star. And the quiet support of mentors like Dr. Hartwell and Victoria, women who understood the subtle art of wielding influence for good, had been my ballast. My personal life had also blossomed. I was engaged now to a kind, brilliant architect named Ben. He didn't just tolerate my passion, he celebrated it. He'd listen for hours as I talked about my work, his eyes alight with genuine interest. He saw my intelligence not as a threat, but as an inspiration. Our conversations were a vibrant exchange of ideas, a true partnership. The simple gold band he'd given me, an antique piece with a tiny, intricately carved bird, felt warm and true on my finger. It was a symbol of love, not a contract. My final quiet power move, the one that brought the most profound satisfaction, was mentoring the first cohort of Phoenix scholars. Seeing their bright, eager faces, their diverse passions ranging from poetry to archaeology to digital art, I saw the future. I saw a generation that would redefine the value of the humanities, that would build bridges between disciplines, that would prove, as I had, that passion, intelligence, and perseverance can indeed triumph over prejudice and short-sightedness. Sometimes the things the world dismisses as worthless, a degree in art history, a quiet girl with unconventional ideas, the subtle power of a well-told story become the most priceless assets of all. My journey had come full circle. I had proven that the worthless paper wasn't just valuable. In the right hands with the right vision, it could change the world. One masterpiece, one innovation, one inspired mind at a time. And that, I realized, was a legacy worth building.